The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Thomas Harrington's room, painting golden streaks across his expensive silk sheets. At 23, Thomas had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. He pushed himself up on his elbows and gazed out at the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched for acres around his father's mansion. Another day in his gilded cage. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," called a cheerful voice as his bedroom door opened. It was Reynolds, one of the many staff members who floated through Thomas's life like ghosts, always present but never quite real. "Beautiful day outside. Shall I help you into your chair?" Thomas nodded, the routine so familiar he barely needed to think about it. Reynolds, a thin man with graying hair who had worked for the family since before Thomas was born, moved with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, Thomas was settled into his custom wheelchair, a sleek machine worth more than what most people earned in a year. "Your father called while you were sleeping," Reynolds said as he adjusted the pillows behind Thomas's back. "He won't be able to make it back this weekend. The meetings in Tokyo are running longer than expected." Thomas kept his face blank, hiding the disappointment that stabbed through him. "Of course they are," he murmured. "When has Dad ever chosen me over work?" Reynolds pretended not to hear, as the staff always did when Thomas mentioned anything that might reflect poorly on Richard Harrington, tech genius and billionaire businessman. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, loyalty was purchased alongside discretion. After breakfast on the terrace, a lonely affair with only the birds for company, Thomas headed to the East Wing for his daily physical therapy session. Dr. Chen, a stern woman with tired eyes, waited with the same equipment they'd been using for years, all of it failing to deliver the miracle everyone had stopped expecting. "Let's try the standing frame today," she suggested, though they both knew it would end as it always did, with frustration and no progress. Thomas's legs, thin and weak from disuse, refused to support his weight. The rare neuromuscular condition he'd been born with had stumped specialists around the world. His father had spent millions flying in doctors from every continent, all of them leaving with fatter bank accounts but no solutions. "That's enough for today," Dr. Chen said after an hour, the disappointment in her voice matching Thomas's own. She had been hired to achieve results, and her failure meant she would likely be replaced soon, joining the long line of medical professionals who had come and gone throughout Thomas's life. Back in his room, Thomas wheeled himself to his desk where his computer setup waited. The only real freedom he knew came through technology, ironically the same field that had made his father rich. Online, nobody knew he was Richard Harrington's crippled son. Online, he was just T. Har, a respected voice in gaming forums and coding communities. As his fingers flew across the keyboard, Thomas lost himself in a world where his disability didn't define him. Hours passed as he worked on a personal project, a game designed to be played one-handed. He'd started it out of frustration when he couldn't play the popular games his online friends enjoyed, but it had evolved into something he was genuinely proud of. "Mr. Harrington?" A knock at the door pulled him back to reality. "Your lunch is ready and your tutor will be arriving in an hour," Thomas sighed. Another schedule planned by others, another day where his choices were limited to which book to read or what clothes to wear. The mansion was massive, with 32 rooms spread across 3 floors, but Thomas's world was much smaller. A private elevator had been installed to help him navigate between levels, but he rarely used it. What was the point of exploring a different floor when every room felt the same? Expensive, perfect, and empty. His afternoon lessons with Professor Walsh dragged on as they studied literature Thomas had no interest in. The old professor had been teaching him since he was 14, brought in after Thomas had been removed from his private school, following an incident where other students had mocked his disability. His father's solution was typical: throw money at the problem, build a classroom at home, hire the best tutors. Keep Thomas hidden away where no one could hurt him, or where he couldn't embarrass the great Richard Harrington. "You seem distracted today," Professor Walsh noted as Thomas's attention drifted toward the window for the 3rd time. "Sorry," Thomas mumbled, "just thinking about Dad's latest no-show." The professor's expression softened. Unlike most of the staff, Walsh sometimes spoke to Thomas like he was a real person. "Your father is a busy man." "Too busy for his son," Thomas countered. "He hasn't been home in over a month." "He provides well for you." Thomas gestured around the room, at the priceless art on the walls, the custom furniture, the cutting-edge technology. He provides things. Great substitute for actually showing up. When Walsh left, Thomas wheeled himself to his favorite spot in the house, a small alcove in the library overlooking the lake at the edge of the property. As a child, he'd spent hours watching the water, dreaming of what it might feel like to run along its shore or swim in its depths. Now, at 23, those dreams had faded into dull acceptance. Dinner was served precisely at 7, as it always was. Thomas ate alone at one end of a table designed to seat 20. The chef had prepared his favorite dish, a small kindness that somehow made the emptiness of the room more pronounced. His phone buzzed with a text message. His father's assistant. Not his father. "Mr. Harrington wanted me to check if you need anything. He'll try to call tomorrow." Thomas didn't bother responding. Tomorrow's call would never come, or if it did, it would be brief and distracted, with the sounds of a business meeting in the background. After dinner, he had his nightly swim in the indoor pool. The water was the one place Thomas felt something close to normal. With the help of special flotation devices, he could move through the water almost independently. The pool had been his father's first major renovation to the house after Thomas's condition was diagnosed. One of many expensive solutions to problems that couldn't be fixed with money. The night nurse, Mrs. Patel, waited with a towel when he finished. "Did you enjoy your swim?" she asked, her voice kind but professional. "Same as always," Thomas replied. Nothing changed in this house. That was the rule. Back in his room, the evening routine unfolded with clockwork precision. Medication, change of clothes, transfer to bed, all performed with the efficiency of people who saw their tasks as jobs rather than interactions with a human being. As midnight approached, Thomas lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house around him was quiet. The staff retreated to their quarters or gone home to their families. In these late hours, the emptiness of his existence pressed down on him like a physical weight. He reached for his tablet and pulled up the latest email from his online friend, someone he'd met through a coding forum who had no idea who he really was. Their conversations about game development and coding challenges were the most honest interactions in Thomas's life. Thomas typed a reply, sharing his latest progress on the game. In these messages, he never mentioned his wheelchair or his father's billions. Here, he was just a person with ideas and skills. It wasn't much, but it was a tiny window into what normal might feel like. As he finally drifted toward sleep, Thomas wondered what would happen if something changed in his perfectly controlled world. What if someone saw past the wheelchair, past the Harrington name, past the walls he'd built around himself? What if someone just saw him? But such thoughts were dangerous. Nothing changed in Thomas Harrington's world. His father had spent a fortune making sure of that. Tomorrow would be exactly like today, a perfect, miserable copy of the day before, or at least, that's what Thomas believed as he closed his eyes, unaware that in less than a week, everything he thought he knew about his life was about to be challenged by someone who refused to follow the rules of his gilded cage. The news arrived during breakfast, delivered by Reynolds with the same tone he might use to announce a change in the weather. "Your father has hired a new household manager. She'll be arriving this afternoon." Thomas paused mid-bite. What happened to Mr. Phillips? The previous manager had been with them for nearly 8 years. "He's decided to retire, sir. Rather suddenly, I might add." Reynolds adjusted his tie, a small tell that there was more to the story. "Dad fired him, didn't he?" Thomas set down his fork. What was the reason this time? Not enough shine on the silverware? Reynolds's expression remained carefully neutral. "I believe there was a disagreement about staffing decisions. Mr. Phillips was resistant to some changes your father wanted to implement." Changes. Thomas's least favorite word. In his experience, changes in the household were never for his benefit. "When does she start?" he asked, already picturing another stiff, formal manager who would treat him like a fragile piece of china. "She's already here, actually." Thomas's head snapped up. "What?" A woman's voice answered from the doorway. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Thomas turned his wheelchair to find a tall black woman standing at the entrance to the dining room. She wasn't what he expected. Instead of the formal attire typical of household staff, she wore simple dark slacks and a deep blue blouse. Her hair was styled in neat braids pulled back from a face that radiated competence. No clipboard, no fussy accessories, just clear, direct eyes that assessed him without a hint of the pity he was accustomed to seeing. "Eleanor Jackson," she said, stepping forward with an extended hand. I'm the new household manager. Thomas stared at her hand for a moment before taking it. Staff rarely initiated physical contact with him, another unwritten rule of his isolated world. Thomas Harrington, he replied, though they both knew introductions were unnecessary. You're early. I like to get the lay of the land before officially starting. Mr. Reynolds has been kind enough to show me around. She smiled at Reynolds, who looked both flustered and impressed. Well, I hope you find everything to your liking, Thomas said, turning back to his breakfast, expecting her to take the hint and leave. She didn't. Actually, I'd like to speak with you about your daily schedule. There are some adjustments I'm considering. Thomas froze. My schedule is fine the way it is. Your father feels otherwise. He's asked me to review all household operations, including your daily routine. Of course he had. Thomas felt a familiar anger rising. And what exactly does my father think is wrong with my routine? Eleanor didn't flinch at his tone. Nothing's wrong with it. But there's always room for improvement. For instance, I notice you spend most of your time indoors. The grounds are beautiful. Perhaps we could schedule some outdoor activities. The wheelchair doesn't exactly handle well on grass, Thomas said dryly. There are pathways, and we can make more if needed. She pulled out a chair across from him, not asking permission, just sitting down like they were equals. Your father mentioned you're interested in technology. I thought perhaps we could set up an outdoor workspace under the gazebo for days when the weather's nice. The suggestion caught Thomas off guard. It was actually thoughtful. That might be okay. He conceded, then immediately regretted showing enthusiasm. Good. We'll try it next week. She stood, smoothing her slacks. I won't take up more of your breakfast time. Dr. Chen is waiting in the East Wing for your therapy session. How do you know my schedule already? Eleanor smiled. It's my job to know. I'll check in with you later, Thomas. She left before he could correct her use of his first name. Staff always called him Mr. Harrington, except for those who had known him since childhood. The breach of protocol was small but significant, like everything else about Eleanor Jackson's arrival. The morning therapy session with Dr. Chen was the same frustrating exercise in futility it always was, but Thomas found himself distracted, wondering what other changes the new household manager had in mind. He got his answer sooner than expected. When he returned to his room to rest after therapy, he found Eleanor there, directing 2 staff members as they rearranged his furniture. What are you doing? He demanded, wheeling himself into the center of the room. Eleanor turned, unfazed by his anger. Creating more space for you to maneuver. The layout before was inefficient. You can't just come into my room and move things around. I can if it improves your quality of life. She pointed to the path between his bed and bathroom. The clearance was too narrow, and your desk was positioned where the glare from the window would hit your screen in the afternoon. Thomas opened his mouth to argue but stopped. She was right. He'd complained about both issues before, but nothing had been done. How did you know about the glare? He asked, suspicion edging his voice. I observed, I asked questions, and I listened to the answers. She straightened a book on his shelf. Novel concept around here, I gather. The comment was just shy of disrespectful, and Thomas wasn't sure whether to be offended or amused. No one spoke to him this way. Even his father maintained a certain formality, as if Thomas's condition demanded a special kind of handling. Is there anything else you plan to observe and fix without asking me? He asked. Plenty. Eleanor dismissed the other staff with a nod. When they were alone, she continued, Your father hired me for a reason, Thomas. This household doesn't run efficiently. There are 28 staff members for 3 residents. You, your father when he's here, and your grandmother when she visits twice a year. That's excessive. So you're firing people? I'm reassigning them. Quality over quantity. She crossed her arms. And I'm changing how they interact with you. Thomas felt a chill. Meaning what? Meaning no more treating you like you're made of glass. No more doing things for you that you could do yourself with the right setup. Anger flared hot and sudden. You don't know anything about what I can and can't do. Actually, I do. Eleanor's voice remained calm. I reviewed your medical files. Your condition limits your mobility, but not your capability. The way this household is structured, you've become unnecessarily dependent. You read my medical files? Those are private. Thomas's hands gripped his wheelchair armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. Your father gave me access. I was a physical therapist before I changed careers. He thought my background might be useful. Thomas stared at her, speechless with anger and something else. Fear, maybe. This woman saw too much, said too much, changed too much. I know you're upset, Eleanor said, softer now.
Change is hard.
But it's necessary. Not for me, Thomas shot back. I've accepted my life as it is. Have you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just existing, not living. The words hit with the force of a physical blow. Thomas turned his chair away, not wanting her to see his expression. You should go. I need to rest. He expected an argument, but instead heard her footsteps moving toward the door. Of course. Your lunch will be served on the terrace today, not in your room. Fresh air does wonders for the spirit. I prefer eating here, Thomas said without turning. Preference noted. But today we're trying the terrace. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. Thomas sat motionless, fury and confusion warring inside him. Who did this woman think she was? And how had she dismantled his carefully constructed routine in less than a day? When lunchtime came, he briefly considered refusing to go to the terrace, staging a small rebellion against the disruption Eleanor had brought into his life. But curiosity won out. He wanted to see what else she had changed. The terrace had been transformed. The heavy iron furniture had been replaced with lighter pieces arranged to accommodate his wheelchair easily. A large umbrella provided shade, and the table was set with a simplicity that somehow felt more inviting than the formal settings he was used to. And there was Eleanor, waiting for him. I thought household managers didn't eat with the family, Thomas said as he positioned his chair at the table. They don't typically, but I'm not typical. She smiled, serving him a plate of food that looked different from his usual lunch. I asked the chef to try a new recipe. Let me know what you think. The meal was delicious, but Thomas refused to show his enjoyment. Throughout lunch, Eleanor spoke of changes she planned. A modified vehicle that he could control himself. Technology upgrades throughout the house, new staff with backgrounds in adaptive recreation. Why are you doing all this? Thomas finally asked. My father must be paying you a fortune. Eleanor considered him for a long moment. I had a daughter who was told she'd never walk again after an accident. Doctors, specialists, therapists, they all said the same thing. But they were wrong. She leaned forward. Sometimes, Thomas, the world puts limits on us that don't need to be there. My job isn't just to run this house. It's to help you see which limits are real and which ones aren't. For the first time since her arrival, Thomas was speechless not from anger, but from the unexpected glimpse of a person behind the role. Eleanor Jackson was not just another employee. She was something his father's money hadn't been able to buy until now. Someone who saw possibility where everyone else, including Thomas himself, had seen only limitations. 2 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, the Harrington household had transformed in ways both small and profound. The staff moved with new purpose. The schedules had been overhauled, and Thomas found himself spending more time outdoors than he had in years. He wouldn't admit it to Eleanor, but the changes were not entirely unwelcome. Late one evening, Thomas wheeled himself to the library, looking forward to the quiet. He stopped short at the entrance. Eleanor sat at the large oak desk, surrounded by stacks of folders, his medical files. It's almost midnight, Thomas said. Don't household managers ever sleep? Eleanor looked up, not startled but not quite composed either. She quickly closed the folder in front of her. I could ask you the same question. Thomas moved closer, eyeing the papers. Find anything interesting in my medical history? Perhaps some childhood embarrassment you can use to further upend my life? Actually, yes. Eleanor's direct answer caught him off guard. She pushed aside several folders and pointed to one labeled with dates from 3 years ago. I've been comparing your test results and doctor reports. Something doesn't add up. Thomas felt a familiar weariness settle over him. Trust me, every specialist from here to Switzerland has looked at those files. There's nothing to find. That's the problem. Eleanor stood and walked around the desk. They were all looking for confirmation of your diagnosis, not questioning it. What are you talking about? Eleanor hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Your condition, the rare neuromuscular disorder you were diagnosed with at age 4. I think it might be wrong. Thomas laughed, a sharp sound without humor. 19 years of tests say otherwise. 19 years of tests based on an initial misdiagnosis. Eleanor pulled out a particular file. Look at these nerve conduction studies from when you were 16. They don't match the typical pattern for your supposed condition. Thomas didn't bother looking. He'd been down this road too many times. Hope followed by crushing disappointment. Even if you're right, what difference does it make? I still can't walk. It makes all the difference in the world. Eleanor's voice grew intense. If you've been treated for the wrong condition, then we've been trying the wrong therapies. She sat down in a chair beside him, bringing herself to eye level. In my previous job, I worked with a girl whose symptoms were similar to yours. Everyone thought her condition was genetic and untreatable. Turns out it was a rare form of chronic inflammation pressing on her spinal cord. And let me guess, you miraculously cured her? Thomas couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. No, I didn't. A specialized treatment protocol did after we got the right diagnosis. Eleanor pushed the files aside. Thomas, what if there's a chance? Even a small one? There isn't. He turned his chair toward the door. Wait. Eleanor moved quickly, blocking his exit. I understand your skepticism. I would feel the same way. But I'm not asking you to believe me yet. I'm just asking for permission to consult with a former colleague of mine. Thomas studied her face, looking for signs of the pity he hated, or the false optimism he'd seen in so many doctors' eyes over the years. He found neither. Instead, there was something rarer, genuine curiosity and determination. Who is this colleague? Dr. Lin Zhao. We worked together at Boston Medical for 5 years. She specializes in neuroinflammatory disorders that mimic genetic conditions. She's brilliant, unconventional, and doesn't care about bedside manner or hospital politics, which is why she now runs her own research clinic instead of heading a department somewhere prestigious. Despite himself, Thomas was intrigued. And you think she might see something in my case? I think she'll at least look without preconceptions. That's rare in medicine, especially when a diagnosis has been accepted for as long as yours has. Thomas considered the proposition. My father has consulted with over 30 specialists from around the world, the best minds in medicine. Yes, and they all knew exactly who your father was and how much he was willing to pay them. Eleanor's bluntness was refreshing. Lynn doesn't care about money or reputation. She cares about puzzles, and your case might be one. Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a tiny, dangerous flicker of hope. He quickly extinguished it. Even if you're right, my father controls my medical decisions. He'd never agree to some experimental treatment. Eleanor smiled, a small conspiratorial gesture. That's why we're not going to tell him. Not until we have something concrete to show. Going behind Richard Harrington's back? That's career suicide. Let me worry about my career. She held his gaze. This isn't about your father. It's about you. Something in her words resonated with Thomas. His entire life had been about his father in some way. His father's money, his father's expectations, his father's disappointment. The idea of doing something solely for himself was novel and slightly terrifying. All right, he said finally. Contact your friend. But don't expect anything to come of it. Eleanor nodded, respecting his caution. I'll send her the files tomorrow. 3 days later, Thomas was in the middle of his usual physical therapy session with Dr. Chen when Eleanor appeared at the door. I need to steal Thomas for an important call, she announced. Dr. Chen frowned. We're in the middle of his therapy. It won't wait. Eleanor's tone made it clear the matter was not up for discussion. In Thomas's room, Eleanor closed the door and set up a laptop on his desk. Dr. Zhao reviewed your files. She wants to speak with you directly. Before Thomas could prepare himself, the screen came to life, showing an Asian woman in her 50s with short, practical hair and intense eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. Thomas Harrington, she said without preamble. Your case is interesting. Not nice to meet you or sorry about your condition, just straight to the point. Thomas found himself liking her immediately. Eleanor seems to think you might have a different opinion on my diagnosis, he said. Not might. Do. Dr. Zhao held up a file. Your supposed genetic disorder should show specific markers in your blood work and nerve conduction studies. They're not there. Instead, I'm seeing patterns consistent with chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, CIDP, complicated by secondary muscle atrophy from disuse. What does that mean in simple terms? Thomas asked. It means your body's immune system has been attacking the protective covering of your nerves for years, and everyone's been treating you for the wrong thing. She leaned closer to the camera. It also means your condition might be treatable. Thomas felt the dangerous hope returning stronger this time. How treatable? Hard to say without examining you personally. The damage is extensive and long-standing, but with the right protocol, immunosuppressants, plasmapheresis, specialized physical therapy, significant improvement is possible. Define significant. Thomas pressed. Dr. Zhao didn't sugarcoat her answer. Best case? Walking with assistance. Worst case? Better sensation and control in your upper body. Less pain, more energy. Either way, better quality of life than you have now. Thomas looked at Eleanor, who had been silently watching the exchange. You believe this? I believe it's worth investigating, she replied carefully. But there's a complication. Dr. Zhao jumped in. The treatment protocol I'd recommend isn't standard. Insurance companies hate paying for it, and hospitals don't like trying it because of liability concerns. Money isn't an issue, Thomas said. It's not about money, Eleanor explained. The protocol is intensive and would require your father's approval, since it involves experimental treatments. Thomas understood the problem immediately. His father would never approve any treatment without extensive research, multiple opinions, and rigid control of the process, all of which would take months, if not years. So we're back to square one, he said, the brief hope deflating. Not necessarily. Dr. Zhao tapped a pen against her desk. Eleanor tells me your father travels frequently and for extended periods. How long is he typically gone? Weeks, sometimes months. That might be enough time to begin the protocol and show preliminary results. Once there's observable improvement, it would be harder for him to shut it down. Thomas looked at Eleanor. You're suggesting we do this behind my father's back? You could lose your job. Worse, he could sue both of you. Eleanor and Dr. Zhao exchanged glances. We've discussed the risks, Eleanor said. And? Thomas pressed. And we think you're worth it, Dr. Zhao stated simply. The blunt answer stunned Thomas into silence. No one had ever taken a risk for him before, not a real one with real consequences. Why? He finally asked. You don't even know me. I know enough, Dr. Zhao replied. Eleanor trusts you and I trust her judgment. Besides, proving all those high-priced specialists wrong would be personally satisfying. Thomas couldn't help but smile at her honesty. He turned to Eleanor. And you? Why risk your career for someone you barely know? Eleanor's expression softened. Because 19 years ago, someone took a chance on my daughter when no one else would. They saw possibility where others saw limitation. I'm just paying it forward. Thomas looked back and forth between the two women. One he'd known for mere weeks, one he'd just met, who were willing to risk so much on the slim chance they could help him. All right, he said, making his decision. Let's do it. Where do we start? Dr. Zhao smiled for the first time. We start by proving everyone wrong. The east wing of the Harrington mansion had been transformed into a makeshift medical facility. Equipment arrived in unmarked vans, delivered by Dr. Zhao's trusted staff who had signed extensive confidentiality agreements. Thomas's regular physical therapist, Dr. Chen, had been given a paid vacation, a necessary deception to keep their plan secret. This is insane, Thomas said as he watched Eleanor and one of Dr. Zhao's assistants set up an IV stand beside his bed. We're basically running an illegal medical operation in my father's house. Not illegal, Eleanor corrected, checking the equipment. Just unauthorized. There's a difference. I'm pretty sure my father won't appreciate the distinction when he finds out. Eleanor adjusted his pillows with practiced hands. Then we better make sure he sees results. Before that happens, the first phase of treatment began that afternoon. Dr. Zhao, supervised remotely via video call as a nurse, started Thomas on a course of high-dose immunosuppressants. The medication made him nauseous and dizzy, but Eleanor stayed by his side, monitoring his reaction and adjusting the dosage as needed. Is it supposed to feel like I'm dying? Thomas groaned after the second day of treatment. It means it's working, Dr. Zhao replied from the laptop screen. Your body is fighting the medication because the medication is fighting your immune system. By the end of the first week, Thomas felt worse than he had in years. The medications left him weak, the daily blood draws bruised his arms, and the new therapy exercises Dr. Zhao prescribed were grueling. I can't do this anymore, he said one morning after a particularly rough night of fever and chills. It's too much. Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed, her face showing signs of the same exhaustion he felt. She hadn't left the mansion in days, monitoring him around the clock. You can, and you will. What's the point? I don't feel any better. If anything, I feel worse. The point is that for the first time in 19 years, you're actually receiving the right treatment. She held up a tablet showing his latest blood work. Your inflammatory markers are already dropping. That's progress. Thomas turned his face away. Progress would be feeling my legs again. That comes later. Right now, we're just trying to stop your immune system from continuing to damage your nerves. She squeezed his hand. I know it's hard, but you're stronger than you think. As the days passed, the treatment routine became their new normal. Mornings began with medication, followed by blood draws and vitals. Then came the physical therapy. Grueling sessions designed by Dr. Zhao that pushed Thomas's limits in ways his previous therapy never had. I want you to focus on sending a signal to your right foot, instructed Dr. Zhao through the video call. Don't try to move it yet. Just focus on the connection. Thomas concentrated, his face tight with effort. Nothing happened. Again, Dr. Zhao insisted. The pathways are there, Thomas. They're just dormant from disuse. Hour after hour, day after day, they continued. The household staff had been told Thomas was trying an intensive new therapy regimen. True, but vague enough to avoid questions about the specifics. Reynolds, sensing something unusual but loyal as always, ran interference when other staff members grew curious. 2 weeks into treatment, Thomas was sitting in the therapy room, exhausted after another session, when he decided to ask the question that had been on his mind. Why did you leave your job as a physical therapist? You clearly know what you're doing. Eleanor, who was putting away equipment, paused. It's a long story. I've got nothing but time, Thomas replied. She sat down across from him, considering her words carefully. I was a senior therapist at Boston Medical Center, specializing in neurological rehabilitation. I loved my job, helping patients recover functions everyone said they'd never get back. Then what happened? Life happened. My daughter Lily was 12 when she was hit by a car walking home from school. Eleanor's voice remained steady, but her hands tensed in her lap. The impact fractured her spine. The doctors said she'd never walk again. Thomas felt a strange reversal. Suddenly, he was the one listening to someone else's pain, instead of being the focus of pity himself. I refused to accept their prognosis, Eleanor continued. I'd seen too many impossibles become possible in my work. So I took a leave of absence and dedicated myself to her recovery. We tried everything: conventional therapy, experimental treatments, alternative medicine. For months, nothing worked. What changed? I met Dr. Zhao. She was giving a lecture I attended out of desperation. Her approach was radical, combining intensive therapy with treatments most doctors wouldn't consider. She agreed to take Lily's case. Eleanor smiled at the memory. Within 6 months, Lily could stand. In a year, she took her first steps. By 18 months, she was walking with just a cane. That's amazing, Thomas said, genuinely impressed. Is she fully recovered now? She still has challenges, but she's in college now studying neuroscience. She wants to help others the way Dr. Zhao helped her. And you gave up your career for her. Eleanor shook her head. I didn't give it up. I changed it. After Lily improved, I couldn't go back to the hospital system with its rigid protocols and limited thinking. But I still wanted to help people. So I reinvented myself, got certified in home healthcare management, and started working with families who needed specialized care. How did you end up here? Thomas gestured around the mansion. Your father's assistant contacted me. They were looking for someone with medical background who could manage a complex household. When I learned about your situation, it seemed familiar. Thomas absorbed this information, seeing Eleanor in a new light. So I'm what, your new project? Another broken person to fix? No, Eleanor's answer was firm. You're someone who deserves more than the limitations others have placed on you. Just like Lily was. Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen and felt a spike of panic. It's my father. He's coming home next week for a board meeting, 3 days earlier than planned. Eleanor's expression remained calm, but Thomas saw concern flash in her eyes. Then we need to accelerate the treatment. I'll call Dr. Zhao. The next few days were the most intense yet. Dr. Zhao added a second daily therapy session and adjusted the medication protocol. The plasmapheresis treatments, a process that filtered Thomas's blood to remove the harmful antibodies attacking his nervous system, left him drained but were showing promising results in his blood work. "I need you to try something today," Eleanor said on the morning of the 5th day of their accelerated schedule. She wheeled a specialized standing frame into the room, a device designed to support his weight while allowing him to attempt to bear some of it himself. "I'm not ready for this," Thomas protested as the nurse helped him into the apparatus. "We don't know what you're ready for until we try," Eleanor countered, securing the straps around his waist and legs. "Dr. Zhao thinks your nerve pathways are beginning to respond. This will help us see how much." Once he was secured in the frame, Eleanor positioned herself in front of him. "Now I want you to focus on your right leg. Not moving it yet, just feeling it." Thomas closed his eyes, concentrating on the limb that had been essentially dead weight for as long as he could remember. For several minutes, nothing happened. "It's not working," he said, frustration edging his voice. "Keep trying. Focus on sending energy down from your hip to your knee." Thomas tried again, visualizing the pathway Eleanor described. Suddenly he felt something. A tingling sensation so faint he might have imagined it, I feel something," he said cautiously. Eleanor's face remained neutral, careful not to feed false hope. "Describe it. Like pins and needles, but deeper." "In my thigh," she nodded. "That's good. Now try to send that feeling down to your knee." Thomas concentrated harder, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. The tingling sensation intensified, spreading downward inch by inch. "It's working," he whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break the fragile connection. "Now, very gently, try to engage your quadriceps, the muscles on the front of your thigh." Thomas focused all his will on the task. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the muscle tensed under the strap. Eleanor saw it and broke into a smile. "You did it." "Not imagination. I saw the muscle contract." The achievement was tiny by normal standards, a slight muscle contraction that would go unnoticed in a healthy person. But for Thomas, it was monumental. For the first time in his memory, he had willfully controlled a muscle in his leg. "Let's try again," he said, newfound determination in his voice. They worked for hours, repeating the exercise with both legs, achieving small but consistent results. By evening, Thomas was exhausted but elated. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in his body but in his mind. The possibility that had seemed so remote now felt tangible. As Eleanor helped him back into his wheelchair, he caught her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. She squeezed his hand in return. "This is just the beginning, Thomas. There's still a long road ahead, I know, but for the first time I actually believe it's a road I can travel." That night, as Thomas drifted toward sleep, his phone buzzed with a text message. He expected it to be Eleanor with instructions for tomorrow's session. Instead, it was his father's assistant. "Mr. Harrington will be arriving tomorrow morning instead of next week. He wants to discuss some changes to the household management with you and Ms. Jackson." Thomas stared at the message, his brief moment of triumph evaporating. Their time had run out. Dawn broke over the Harrington estate as Thomas and Eleanor rushed to hide evidence of their secret treatment program. The specialized medical equipment was moved to a rarely used guest suite, medication bottles locked away, and Dr. Zhao's remote monitoring setup dismantled. "He's going to know something's up," Thomas said as Eleanor helped him into his regular clothes. The physical toll of their accelerated treatment schedule showed in the dark circles under his eyes. "I look like I've been through a war." "Then we don't hide it," Eleanor decided, adjusting his collar. "We tell him you've been trying a new physical therapy regimen. It's not a lie, just not the whole truth," Thomas added with a wry smile. "Exactly." She squeezed his shoulder. "Remember, focus on what you've achieved. No matter what happens with your father, that's real." The sound of car tires on the gravel driveway signaled Richard Harrington's arrival. Thomas wheeled himself to the grand entrance hall, Eleanor a few steps behind him. They had agreed she would let him take the lead with his father. Richard Harrington entered the mansion like a force of nature. Tall, imposing, his tailored suit and perfect posture projecting the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling every situation. At 58, his dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, his face lined with the marks of power rather than warmth. "Thomas," he said, his voice carrying across the marble floor, "you look tired." It wasn't a question or a concern, simply an observation. Hello to you too, Dad. Thomas maneuvered his wheelchair forward. How was Tokyo? Productive. Richard handed his coat to Reynolds before his gaze settled on Eleanor. Ms. Jackson, I understand you've made some changes to the household. Yes, sir. As you requested. Eleanor's tone was professional, giving nothing away. Richard nodded slightly. We'll discuss the details later. First, I need to speak with my son. Privately. Eleanor glanced at Thomas, who gave her a small nod. She left the room, closing the doors behind her. Richard walked to the window, looking out at the grounds for a long moment before turning back to Thomas. My assistant tells me there have been unusual deliveries to the house. Medical equipment not authorized by your regular doctors. Thomas felt his heart rate quicken but kept his expression neutral. I have been trying some new approaches to physical therapy. Without consulting me? You were in Tokyo. Besides, I'm 23, Dad. I don't need your permission for everything. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly at his son's defiance. When it comes to your medical care, yes, you do. I'm responsible for your well-being. Are you? The words escaped before Thomas could stop them. You're hardly ever here. I'm building a legacy for you. Richard snapped, a rare crack in his composed facade. Everything I do is for your future. What future? Thomas shot back. The one where I sit in this chair forever, alone in this house, while you fly around the world building legacies. Father and son stared at each other, the tension between them thick with years of unspoken resentments and misunderstandings. Finally, Richard sighed and sat down in an armchair, bringing himself closer to Thomas's eye level. What exactly have you been doing? He asked, his tone softer. Thomas hesitated, then decided on the truth. Getting a second opinion. Or rather, a 33rd opinion. He explained about Eleanor's background in physical therapy, her suspicions about his diagnosis, and Dr. Zhao's alternative theory. He left out the more experimental aspects of the treatment, but emphasized the promising blood work results. Richard listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Thomas finished, he stood and walked to the door. Ms. Jackson, he called. Join us, please. Eleanor entered, her composure perfect despite the uncertainty of the moment. Is what my son says true? Richard asked without preamble. You believe he's been misdiagnosed all these years? Yes, sir. The evidence strongly suggests it. And this Dr. Zhao, she's credible? She's one of the most innovative neurological specialists in the country, Eleanor replied. What she lacks in bedside manner, she makes up for in brilliance. Richard turned back to Thomas. Show me. Thomas understood immediately what his father was asking. I need to get to the therapy room. In the East Wing therapy room, Thomas positioned his wheelchair beside the standing frame. Eleanor moved to help him, but Richard stepped forward. I'll assist my son, he said. The words were gentle, not a command. Together, they transferred Thomas to the standing frame and secured the supports. Richard stepped back, watching intently as Thomas closed his eyes and concentrated. I've been working on this for days, Thomas explained. It's still small, but... He focused all his energy on his right leg, the same way Eleanor had taught him. The muscle in his thigh tensed visibly. Then, with tremendous effort, his knee moved just an inch, but a deliberate, controlled movement. Richard's stoic expression cracked. You moved it, he whispered. Yes. Thomas smiled through his exertion. Not much, but it's a start. Can you do more? For the first time in Thomas's memory, his father sounded uncertain, almost afraid to hope. Let's try something we've been working toward, Eleanor suggested. She positioned herself on one side of Thomas while Richard stood at the other. We're going to lower the support of the frame a bit, so you'll need to engage those muscles more actively. Thomas nodded, sweat already beading on his forehead from the effort. Eleanor adjusted the frame, reducing its support by 30%. Thomas felt his weight shift, felt gravity pulling against his weakened legs. Now focus, Eleanor coached. Remember the pathway we've been strengthening. Hip to knee, knee to ankle. Thomas closed his eyes, channeling all his concentration. The room around him disappeared. His father's presence, Eleanor's encouragement, everything faded away except the connection to his legs. He felt the tingling energy flow downward, felt the muscles engage one by one, and then he was bearing weight. Not much, perhaps 10% of his body weight, but his legs were supporting him, however slightly. Thomas, his father's voice broke through his concentration. Open your eyes. Thomas looked down. He was standing, still mostly supported by the frame but partially on his own power. He looked up at his father and saw something he'd never seen before. Tears in Richard Harrington's eyes. "How?" Richard asked, turning to Eleanor. "How is this possible when every specialist said it wasn't?" "Because they stopped looking for answers," she replied simply. "They accepted limitations instead of challenging them." Thomas felt his strength waning and signaled for help. His father and Eleanor eased him back into the wheelchair, but the victory remained. He had stood, however briefly, however partially, on his own power. In his study later that evening, Richard sat across from Dr. Zhao on the video call, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to cautious hope as she explained the full treatment protocol and prognosis. With continued therapy and treatment, Thomas should regain significant function, Dr. Zhao concluded. The progress won't be quick or easy, but it will come. "Whatever resources you need," Richard said. "They're yours." After the call ended, he turned to Eleanor, who had been standing quietly nearby. "I owe you an apology, Ms. Jackson, and my gratitude. I was just doing my job, Mr. Harrington." "No." Richard shook his head. "You went far beyond your job. You saw possibility where everyone else saw limitations, including me." He looked down at his hands. "Especially me." 6 months later, the Harrington Foundation for Neurological Research opened its doors, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to challenging conventional diagnoses and developing innovative treatments for conditions previously considered untreatable. Dr. Zhao headed the research department, while Eleanor directed the therapy programs, and on the day of the grand opening, Thomas Harrington walked through the front doors. Not alone, he still needed the support of forearm crutches and had Eleanor beside him every step of the way. But he walked, one painstaking step after another, to the podium where his father waited. The audience rose in a standing ovation as Thomas reached the stage. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the press, but Thomas barely noticed them. His focus was on each step, each movement that represented months of pain, effort, and unwavering determination. When he reached the microphone, he paused to catch his breath. The room fell silent. "All my life," he began, "people told me what I couldn't do, what was impossible, what I should accept." He looked at Eleanor, standing proudly at the side of the stage, until someone finally asked a different question. What if everyone was wrong? After the ceremony, as the guests mingled and celebrated, Thomas found a quiet moment with Eleanor on the facility's rooftop garden. "So," he said, leaning on his crutches. "Not bad for someone who was supposed to never walk again." Eleanor smiled. "I never doubted you for a minute." "Liar," Thomas laughed. "You doubted me constantly. That's why you pushed so hard." "True," she admitted. "Doubt is important. It makes us question assumptions. Without doubt, we accept limitations too easily." Thomas looked out over the city below them. "My father wants me to join the company board next year. Says it's time I took my place in the family business." "And what do you want?" The question was simple but profound. For most of his life, what Thomas wanted hadn't been considered important. His condition, his father's expectations, his supposed limitations had dictated his path. "I want to help run this foundation," he said with certainty. "I want to find more people who've been told impossible and help them prove everyone wrong." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "The world needs more impossible things to become possible." Thomas shifted his weight, still getting used to the sensation of standing, of bearing his own weight. Each day brought new challenges, new pains, and new victories. The journey ahead remained long and uncertain, but for the first time it was his journey to choose. "Thank you," he said simply, "not just for helping me walk, but for helping me see beyond the limitations everyone placed on me, including myself." Eleanor smiled, the setting sun illuminating her face. "We all have two choices in life, Thomas. Accept the boundaries others give us or push beyond them to find what's truly possible." She looked at him standing there, still struggling, still imperfect, but undeniably transformed. "I'm glad you chose possibility,"